folks. Welcome to Project Gamma. At Project Gamma, we have smart conversations with smart people across entrepreneurship, technology, and cybersecurity. My name is Warner Moore. I'm a technologist and security leader who's helped build multiple business-to-business software as a service companies, who's passionate about modern cybersecurity practices. I'm also the founder of Gamma Force. At Gamma Force, we help tech and health tech companies with cybersecurity strategy through serving as their fractional security organization. Andrew Wolfe has a background as a technologist and engineer and is a serial entrepreneur. He has founded multiple companies over the years, Queggle, Skiplist, and now Bloomfilter. At Bloomfilter, Andrew is co-founder and wears multiple executive hats, including co-CEO and CTO. Welcome, Andrew.
Hey, Warner, thanks for having me.
Well, Andrew, I don't encounter a lot of folks who are co-CEO. What's your philosophy behind that?
Yeah, I've been CEO before, and I was a singular founder as well. And that job's very difficult. I know this as a founder and a CEO yourself. It's just a lot of different hats to wear. It's finance, operational. You own the product or service and the standards that get set there. You own everything, and that amount of ownership can be overwhelming, especially at like an ambitious tech company that's VC backed like Bloomfilter. And me and my co-founder, Eric, decided to split that role. He heads up our go-to-market and operational side. I head up the product side, both of which are full-time jobs and both of which tend to fall onto the CEO hat at the end of the day. By splitting it, we can really focus in and be able to do what we do best, but also allows us to swing into the other's lane, right? There's some things that Eric's good at in product that I'm not. And conversely, I'm good with sales and our customers and everything else. And so it really allows us, as long as we put our ego aside, to really get the best of both worlds, where you have people that can play every position on the field, but at the same time can focus their time on the things that they're really good at and their background and everything else. I find it gives us a superpower. And it's also, we had done this 4.5 years ago when we founded the company, but if you look at Salesforce, they have co-CEOs now, and you look at some of the newer companies, they're starting to get it. Oracle has recently done it. I think you're going to start to see this trend become a very interesting thing, especially as people realize that the CEO job and giving all of that responsibility to one person is setting that person up to fail, versus giving them the ability to have an ecosystem around them and a team around them and splitting responsibilities down a much more equitable and focused way.
Yeah, I like your thoughts there. I mean, there's always so much to do. A small company, a startup, and I feel the weight that you talk about every day. And when we think of executive teams, and I think it was the book, The Five Dysfunctions of a Team, Patrick Lencioni, who really made me start thinking of it as an executive team. And really, sure, we might have functional areas and we're responsible and we have reporting structures up into us, but ultimately, as an executive team, we're responsible for duty of care. If there's not revenue, it doesn't matter if you're CTO, CEO, or CMO, it doesn't matter. Like, if there's not revenue, the company fails. So as a team, we're responsible for it. And I think at startups, we miss that frequently.
Yeah, absolutely. And it allowed us as well to gel around the same number, right? So obviously revenue right now is king. Before, in the fundraising market, you didn't need as much revenue for a VC-backed company. But now revenue, you have to show traction, you show growth. And now the growth numbers are even more aggressive than they've ever been. I think that's going to become more and more the norm over time. But the big thing is being able to say, here's the gold North Star metric that we're both accountable for. We might roll up to a different way, right? So if I own the roadmap, the ability to go build it, he might own sales and the actual selling of it. But now we're responsible for the same thing, and we create alignment that way. And then decision-making as well becomes not one person forcing the org down what they think is right. It's now a collaborative decision among two people that are thinking about it from different angles, that are, while biased towards their own direction, biased in the proper way towards that one measure. And it allows for like us to focus strategically on the roadmap, not just what does go-to-market need tomorrow to hit the revenue number, which oftentimes happens at companies, especially for tech people. I know they all feel this of being pulled in the direction of, well, sales needs this or marketing needs this or customer. Like, it's very easy to get pulled in that way. And then the strategy goes by the wayside. And it's like, no, we are building a very aggressively ambitious business. And so we can prioritize both the roadmap and the go-to-market because you have two people that have even power in the organization, be able to put and have their point of view on it. So we end up with a much more balanced approach to how we execute engineering and product.
You mentioned this. You're a technologist and you built some impressive businesses, eight-figure services business, Skip List, and now you're building a VC-funded product company. What are some lessons in contrast from your experience between services and product businesses?
It's funny, when I was running a services business, I wanted to be running a product business. And now I'm running a product business. I look at the services business and say, wow, that was actually not that bad. I mean, at the end of the day, they both optimize a little differently, right? For services, you have to optimize around people hours and how you execute getting the right people onto the right projects for the right companies. And then on the flip side of the product, you're optimized around aligning the roadmap and aligning the product to the market demands and also your competitors and how you're perceived and everything else. At the end of the day, I think we talked about this a little earlier. The value of a good business is that it's a good business. Does it represent its stakeholders? Does it provide value in the market? Does it do what it said it was going to set out to do? In that, then I don't think one's more valuable than the other. Certainly, if you look at the markets, maybe not anymore. SaaS kind of is down, not to talk current events, but the multiples also shift over time, right? And so right now, product companies are down and service companies are skyrocketing. Because it's cyclical, I think people are going to look back on every single one of these cycles and say, well, what did we miss last time? And it'll come back to product and it'll be services next in 5 years. And services are hot right now. And so that's what people are talking about, software as a service or services software and the AI. But that's not going to stay the same. First principles dictate that, well, because we'll have learned the lesson we learn every time in these cycles.
Yeah, the thing is, just less folks remember the lessons, right? I think that if we think generationally in the term of people's lifetime, I was active professionally during the dot-com bubble burst, so I remember that. But there's a lot of folks now professionally who don't. And well, there's similarities, but first principles, I love how you ground in that. And I'd also shed a light too, and I think we're guilty of this, especially in tech circles where we glamorize product over other businesses. And a good business is a good business. And we've more, and it doesn't matter the category, good businesses have more in common than not. But what I do want to emphasize a little more, something you said caught my ear. You're talking about stakeholders, and with capitalism, it could be a little tricky depending on the way we look at it. For public companies, we're frequently chasing quarterly earnings, and private VC-funded companies, we're often chasing big multiples. Should we weigh the investors over other stakeholders? What are your thoughts?
I look back and again, first principles, the book that defined capitalism, I think, at least the original form of capitalism, maybe not what it drew into today, but market capitalism was The Wealth of Nations. And The Wealth of Nation dictates that a good business takes care of all of the shareholders. And that's your community, that's your employees, that is your shareholders as well. But it's the people around you, both your internalities and your externalities, right? And it dictates that if you're going to run a good business, then you have to make sure and look out for everybody in there. And I subscribe to that version of capitalism. I think that that's what made everything great. And then sometime in the 1970s, the guy that will not be named in this call decided that he was going to say, no, the only thing that mattered was shareholders. And so that when you look at the investor focus, but when you get to that investor focus, I don't think what people realize is you have a fiduciary duty because you're a CEO. I'm a fiduciary of my company. And what that dictates, because of the fiduciary duty that came from this principle of only shareholders, I cannot do anything that harm my shareholders, or I can be arrested for that, right? And we see CEOs that actually do go to jail, right? And it doesn't happen too frequently. It's because they lied to their shareholders, aka investors, or they did something that they knew would otherwise. Society, I don't think we've put two and two together, that the people that when we moved everyone to 401ks instead of pensions, which may have been for the best for long-term sustainability, they could debate that either way. The people push to maximize shareholder value because they own it and they need it for their retirement, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. The fiduciary duty pushes the CEO to respond to that in a unvirtuous cycle. And so what you get is a group of people who are pushing the CEOs to do potentially harmful things to the communities that they operate in and everywhere else, but they have to because that's what they're being asked to from their shareholders, and they're responsible to solely them. So then you have this short-term thinking, quarter to quarter, and then also you start to see people doing things like dumping things in rivers and everything else because of the pushing from society saying, oh, I need to retire, so you need to do this. They make decisions, and it's a slide down. It's why the airlines get worse every year. It's not because they want to get worse. It's because you're like, no, United, I need 10% stock return. And the guy says the only way to do that is to shrink the seats and not give you free drinks anymore. So then they shrink the seats, and now you have to pay for soda. And then you're like, well, why does that happen? It's like, you asked for this. You didn't directly ask for it, but you pushed them to do it. And so you have the societal cycle that I think if you ask most public CEOs, they tell you, no, I wish I could think in 5-year horizons, in 10-year horizons. But that's not what they're rewarded for. And by the way, if they do it too aggressively, they can be fired for it. They lose their job. And so to wrap that up, I think we need as a society to break that somewhere. And I don't think you're going to break it at the individual level. I think they're going to continue to care about their portfolio and their retirement and their family and their investments. So you have to break it at the fiduciary duty level. And we need to go back to the wealth of nations and say, no, you're not responsible just to your shareholder. You're responsible to your community. And if you do anything that hurts your community, or you do anything to hurt the people around you, your employees, you can be held liable for that too. And if you do that, that will return long-term thinking, and the market will have to reward it, or you just won't have businesses at all. And that will obviously mean you don't have a stock market.
Great thoughts. I often talk about duty of care, fiduciary duty, even when it relates to cybersecurity. Every now and then I'll be talking to someone about working together, and they say something like, well, they talk about liability. And I always spend more time on that because we're not insurance, right? Gamma Force is not an insurance company. And if they're hiring us to transfer risk, that's an automatic mismatch. Now, say we're working, when I'm working with the company and we're building security strategy and governance capabilities, even wearing the CISO hat from an execution perspective, if I'm not an officer in a company, I cannot have duty of care. And it's the executive team that shares that. So how do we create those governance capabilities? And I think sometimes, and it's weird to say as executives, especially if we're so focused on tactical execution within our functional areas, we lose that.
Well, and that's, I think, where you come into a really healthy loop is saying, hey, everybody is responsible for this thing, right? But so CS is responsible for cybersecurity, but you're responsible for making sure the customer docs are secure for this, this, and this, and this. And you need to partner with Warren or whoever your CISO happens to be. Because if you just say, hey, guess what, Warren, you're the guy, right? And you have to be responsible for everything. It's like, well, then the CISO says, the head of customers like, okay, well, I'm not responsible for it, so I don't actually care. It's like, no. You technically all are. And I think people think, oh, well, shared accountability. It's like, well, no, you can break responsibility up and give it to somebody. And you can say, hey, you're responsible for the numbers. You're making sure they're going to have to consult with you. So you're responsible for the implementation of it, but they're responsible for the fact that their files are secure and that their salespeople aren't logging in to Salesforce at a coffee shop in an unsecured network. Like, you need to put the tools in place to make sure that happens, but they need to be responsible. And if they're not responsible, they're not engaging with you, then they can be held liable. They can be held, because if not, if you don't share that accountability for these core aspects of it, then you end up in a world where, again, they don't care. And you can see it. Like, I work with companies all the time, and you can see where one person is like the person that's going to hang for this, and the rest of them are just trying to do their job, and they have enough to do. And so you just have to think about, how do I structure my business to be able to maximize for those kind of risk management scenarios. And because it's going to happen more and more, right? The world's accelerating more and more. We've been accelerating. You look at the graphs from since the dark ages till now, and the loops are getting shorter and shorter, and they have been. And we're just going to continue to accelerate because of technologies. And there's no reason to believe this is the last technology thing that's ever going to happen. Some people will tell you that, singularity and all that nonsense. But we're just going to keep inventing stuff. And as we invent stuff, it's going to be tighter and tighter and tighter. And we're going to speed up more and more. More we can help people realize they're all accountable for this. And that's a shared responsibility for risk. We end up in a world that we can handle that acceleration. And if you don't, then it's going to topple over because one guy couldn't possibly handle everything that's coming.
I love how you talk about shared accountability in the officer team. It's incredible how few people get that. It's not unusual when I work with the CTO and I'm taking the security stuff off their plate. I'll see that the team, the organization is looking at the CTO as solely accountable for cybersecurity. That's a failing pattern. That's an anti-pattern. And the same could be true of revenue, right? If a single person is accountable for a core business function, it's the executive team who shares that accountability.
Yeah.
And looking at it as anything else is frequently toxic and certainly not productive.
Well, that's exactly right. So if you have, I think risk is core to the business, right? And cybersecurity is part of that risk. You look at the numbers that you have, right? Revenue is broken down by, yeah, okay, so the sales guy can't sell without leads. Okay, I'll give that to you. Marketing has accountable for leads, but guess what? You're also accountable for selling. And so you can break down the numbers. And I think it's a system decomposition problem. Okay, when I say cybersecurity, what does that mean? Well, the chief medical officer at a healthcare company is going to own the EMS. So they need to also own the securing of that EMS. And they might not know how to do it. So they need a partner. But then ownership can be a number and a partnership with the person that can give you the expertise you need. And so I like to say my job as CTO, like my job as an architect. People ask, what is software architecture? And I tell them all the time, it can be summed up in 2 words. It's business enablement. You might be in the business of open source. You might be in the business of a SaaS product. You might be in the business of something else entirely, but it's business enablement. My job is to enable everyone else to do their job with technology. And that's sales. That means building a compelling product. That's marketing. It means being able to give them innovation, something to talk about, something that they can get people excited about. In a CS, I need to give them the tooling and the capability to manage and configure the product to their customers. But all that's enabling everyone else. My job is to do that. And the cybersecurity and CISOs are in the same boat. Your job is to enable people to manage their risk and give them the tools they need to do it. But your job isn't to take over and say, I'm going to do it all for you, because again, you can't. There's too much. And any reasonably sized, impactful business, you need people to be able to understand that they own it, and they need to come to you to be able to provide the expertise to manage it.
Love it. And something I'll come back to in what you were talking about is focusing on the value creation. And it can be the business or technology. Either way, focusing on the value creation. I think we miss that when we get all focused on these metacognition problems or this meta work. If we focus on the value creation, well, everything else sorts out along the way. I'll come back to conscious capitalism because I think that is just so important, ensuring we're creating value for all stakeholders, especially as technology is shifting. And technologists are as important as they ever have been. But we're having major shifts in technology businesses right now. So big tech companies are reducing workforces, but in the companies I run, I look at, if I have to reduce my team, who I value, because of things outside of my control, unless it's a black swan event or multiple things happen concurrently that were unexpected, I look at that as a failure. So, and partly why is because I look at all stakeholders, the team, the employees, the customers, the shareholders, and it's good you're thinking about things that way. The world would be a better place if we all looked at business that way.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Oh, and here's the thing. I think, again, back to first principles here. I've lived through this because same as you on the dot-com bubble when they told everybody that was a developer, you won't have a job here in 2 years because it's all going to be offshore. So pick something else to do here. But in reality, what happened was wages ballooned because everyone fired everybody. Everyone realized, oh no, we still need people. We need to hire these people back. And the other first principle I think at play here that people aren't really considering is that we were not in a demand limited business. We were in a supply limited business, right? There was not enough software to meet the demand that people wanted, right? We did not solve every business problem, automate everything away. And so therefore there was a large swath of things software hadn't eaten yet, right? Mark Andreessen's software is eating the world. I would say we barely scratched 30% of society's problems that software could have fixed. So what happens when you get a supply limited business in history or a supply limited area of the market? Well, when supply is removed, demand doesn't go away. You now have an equal curve. So what's going to happen here is when those two things meet, just like any economy, people are going to want more of it. So those two things are going to actually finally be able to meet. Well, what does that require? That requires people to actually be hired to do this. And so what's happening now is what behavior I like to call show me the behavior and I'll tell you the reward. The reward function is people being rewarded for firing people. The stock's going up because you got rid of 30% of people. What's actually going to happen is you're going to realize in about, we'll call it 12 months, you're going to see salaries balloon. You're going to realize you couldn't get rid of everybody and that we're going to return back to a very boomed market. Now, eventually that will stop and we'll actually meet the yield curves. And so we won't be growing 30% year over year as software investment has for years. So eventually it'll become a mature market. But this is just going to mature the market. And so where I come back to full circle on this is all the AI maximalists in the world don't understand, probably have not used it. And two, don't understand a core part about this is that, yes, the job's going to change, but the job's still going to exist. I become less of a guy typing things into a computer and more of a systems thinker, more of a how do I break and decompose this problem? But there's still a need for someone to do that because the AI doesn't know how to do that. And the idea that AI is going to do that and understand the business context and understand everything else, we're a decade at plus away from that, even beginning to be a reality. And we don't have the systems and the infrastructure to support that yet either, to build a high trust system that could automatically build software. I just think that we've seen this before. We've seen this play, and the people buying into it are buying into it because it's very profitable to buy into it today. And we're going to end up in the same boat we were before, which is you're still going to need people. The job might change, but the people, the highly valuable people that helped you solve the problems before are still needed. They're just going to move way faster.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, humans are, well, I think back to as technologists when we got rid of data entry. It's that was a pretty low value activity, right? Entering data into computers, and somehow humans are still employed, adding value in the world. So we now have technology to solve problems that technology wasn't good at solving before, but it's also being used to solve some lower value problems. So what we don't necessarily know is where the humans will be focused. But I like you, I believe that there's a lot of opportunity for humans to add value in the world. And if we, at least thinking from a personal perspective, if I'm not thinking about change and getting caught up in whether or not I like it, but more focusing on how I can make an impact, it sorts out in the end.
Of course. And we talked about this a bit before. We're going to see the golden age of a lot of things, right?
Mm.
There's not been a technology that has come out with humanity that has decreased the amount of jobs, not a single one. And to believe that this is the one that does it is to be a pessimist. And I'm not the pessimist sounds smart. The optimists make all the money. And so you can sound as pessimistic as you want about how bad or good things are. The reality is that if it stops adding value, it's because humanity's gone. And by the way, that's no longer your problem, right? Because you're gone. So, like in both cases, it's better to look on the optimistic take, which is every technology has done this before. No reason to believe this one's different. You might not like the change that happens. That's a reality of it. But on the other side of that, you're still going to be employable. There's still going to be jobs. There's still going to be something to do, even if it's being a space pirate. And you know what? That sounds like a dope thing happened, right? But like, AGI allows us to travel the stars. Like, I don't know. That seems great.
Yeah, lately I feel like we're evolving slower as a species. Admittedly, we've not evolved in tens of thousands of years, but just rhetorically. So maybe not as close to the Star Trek utopia as I'd maybe like us to be, but I do think there's a lot of opportunity for humans to refocus on the highest value creation. You mentioned the golden age, and before you've shared with me the golden age of cybersecurity, what do you mean by that?
Before we had, I mean, Mythos, the Claude models, finding all these security vulnerabilities have been here for decades. Two things are going to be true. We're going to create more software than we've ever created before. It's going to be generated by AI, things that don't quite understand because learning off of, well, where did it learn all the ability to generate code? Off of all the insecure code that was written before. It's going to make insecure mistakes off of insecure code to begin with, and just generating vulnerabilities at a rate we've never even considered before. So there's going to be a whole thing on securing supply chains and securing all of this as that loop becomes inevitably faster. On top of that, you have red teams now that have unlimited, hypothetically, right? Because you red teams from, say, a nation state, we'll call it just the United States for now to keep it simple, that now have unlimited money effectively to just point it at your stuff and say, Claude, find me security vulnerabilities, make no mistakes. And so now if you're on the blue team, but for the first time, I actually think in history, we might have evened the odds out because now the blue team also has the same thing. And now, in my mind, it becomes token spend versus token spend. If you're the good guys, in quotation, you have to spend more tokens. But there is, in that sense, some equality now. Because if you're on the good guy side, know what your mission is, which is to spend more money on the tokens, scanning things and generating the fixes and managing those fixes, versus the bad guys, the red team, being able to also spend tokens, and the side that spends the most tokens is going to win. So when I say golden age, all of this stuff is just going to be sped up to the point where you need so many more professionals, so many more people working on it, and so many more interesting things found that we haven't even, I think, considered. We haven't scratched the surface of some of the stuff because it used to take, a team of Warrens to sit down and look at the problem, really disaggregate it, understand where the kernel issue was or whatever, and find a clever hack to blow the buffer to get some data out of it. And that took years potentially to do. Now you can speed that up to the fact that maybe you can do it in minutes. And that in itself is such a fascinating, because not only do you have to say, okay, you found something, let me validate it. Oh, let me patch it. And then there's just going to be so much. And because everyone's doing it, it's just, again, I think it's going to be a Cambrian explosion of tooling, of management, of all of that, because now it becomes, I hope someone doesn't find out that there's an issue in the Linux network stack. It's like, no, if it exists, it's going to be found. And now everybody needs to manage how we patch it, how we roll it out, how we accelerate, and how we think about this new threat landscape. And we're just getting started, right? Opus 4.7 dropped an hour ago, right? And so like this is just going to keep accelerating. And I think it's going to be one of the coolest things that you ever see, because personally, I think there's more good security people out there than the people potentially trying to attack nation states and doing the normal stuff. But in that, you only need a couple bad actors and I guess a very rich benefactor to go after and find real threats that could potentially bring down power grids and cause real world damage. And now that just requires all hands on deck.
Yeah, I'll digress briefly and move on. I truly do think that the nation state problem is a government policy problem. These are acts of war,
Yeah.
but we're allowing them to be normalized. Like we're allowing countries to attack us, our private companies, and we have, as private citizens, have to defend against countries attacking us. That's not right. That's an act of war. But until we solve that, I bring it up in policy circles. I don't spend much time with political folks. That's not where I spend my life. But occasionally I'll be in a room and I bring up that point because
it's a failure of imagination. Because I mean, we both know that, I'm sure, if we ever go to war with one of the myriad of people that dislike us, that have cybersecurity people, the first thing that's going to happen is power grids are going to be damaged. Water treatment plants are going to be damaged. All the things that aren't stopgap or have security vulnerabilities. And while they're merely stealing corporate secrets at the moment, which seems small and innocent, we also know that the failure of imagination of like, is it any better to bomb a substation or just to blow it up because you found a way to overclock it remotely? Like, are any
Same
of them
thing.
really that different? It's the same thing.
Yeah.
And people don't know that they can do that. And the government can't necessarily tell you that because what the mass panic that would happen when people realize that, I guarantee you that the United States has the keys to all the stuff going on in China, and they have all the keys for an example. And in that, the minute one of them clicks the button, the other one clicks the button, and boom, now all bets are off. You're
Doesn't
effectively
have to be
EMPing.
kinetic to be war. Like
Correct. Yep.
this behavior should not be acceptable. But we can't solve that right now. I will come back to the software supply chain and AI thing. I was chatting with my CTOO last night, and he mentioned that he thought open source software would become the most secure software, and I responded back that it already was. So it'll become even more secure. We had, I think, Project Blackwing, but where Gen AI found an obscure vulnerability in a BSD operating system. And my first thought was, is it OpenBSD? Because OpenBSD is one of the most secure operating systems there is. Every line of code is securely audited, and it's open source. But that's part of how the project operates. So other operating systems don't operate to that level. So when I found out it was an OpenBSD, I was less excited. But everything is vulnerabilities. We
Yeah.
just have found them or we've not. So now we have a tool to help us make more secure software, which I think is great when it comes down to it.
See, I agree with both you and your CTO because here's the thing. If it's a token versus token war, if you're the company spending all the tokens for security, you have a finite amount of money, assumingly, right? But if it's open source and it becomes an important open source library, then everybody's spending tokens to scan it and secure it and everything else. So you widen the amount of money you can spend towards securing software and finding those vulnerabilities. Everything should be open source. I just saw a company this morning take the wrong route. They closed sourced their system. I think you're going to see a lot of people say, well, okay, if I can't potentially win, I'll give you less information. And I think that's the wrong way to figure it out because it requires one piece of information leak. You have to be wrong one time and they're going to be able to just exploit the hell out of you. If I get your Python version, if I figure it out, then you're cooked. And that you can't exist in that world. You have to say, you know what? You know everything about me, but so do I, and so does everyone else. And good luck. Like you're in the same boat we are.
Yeah, yeah. It's, well, what we say in the security world is security through obscurity is not security. And we can have super vulnerable software, but just because it's closed source, it doesn't make us any more secure. Wow, golden age of cybersecurity. One of your primary hats as CTO, you're building a tech company at the bleeding edge of technology. It's moving fast. How do you stay on top of a space moving so fast?
Yeah, honestly, tech has always moved kind of fast, much faster now. It feels like every day there's something new you have to do. But I always go back to what I've been saying the entire time on this podcast is first principles. It's when I see AI come out, it was like, well, of course AI, this LLM thing was going to happen, right? If you look at the transformer and you understood the transformer and you understood what came before that and the initial versions of deep learning, and then you understood neural nets, this stuff all builds on itself. And so what seems like magic to some people, to me, it's just like, of course this was going to happen. And you start to think what's happening next. Well, it's just natural. It's another building block on the previous architectures. And so I like to look at that and say, well, when we look at societal change, like for example, a monolith versus microservice. So you look back 7 years, everyone like everything's going to be a microservice. And that was the future. But it was like, well, no, because what you're doing is you're moving complexity from the code base into your organization. Some organizations can do that. Some organizations can't do that. It depends on how big their tech team is. So Netflix, that makes all their money on tech, of course, can pull that into their organization and get top engineers to manage it. That makes sense for them. But a different organization, lumber supply chain, is not going to be able to do that. And then on top of that, when you start to look at code generation and everything else, context is king. So then if you spread context too far out, well, now you have to consolidate the context, right? And so architectures become cyclical too, right? We're going to see a lot more monolithic architectures when AI does better against monoliths, and it does. And so all of this is to say, if you look at it and you look at both layer in the societal changes that you have to understand, layoffs are occurring right now. So there's going to be less people. Less people means more condensed architectures. More condensed architectures naturally lend to monoliths, right? It's just a natural concurrence that will happen. And then eventually, to my point earlier, it'll balloon and we'll get back to microservices because it's cheaper to move that into the organization. And so what I like to think about technology moving fast is always go back and say, well, what's happening in today's world? What happened? And then what's going to happen next? And be a student of history and technology to be able to say, okay, I'm pretty sure I know what happens next here. And in that, can I prepare for that? Can I think about being a step ahead of where things are going? And that's kind of how Bloomfilter pivoted to being more of a context layer rather than just a SaaS BI tool months ago before this became even the stock and everything else, and SaaS being not sexy. It was like, well, this was going to happen because it needs to happen because AI is not going back into the box. It's too valuable.
I'm just thinking about what you just shared. It's something that I've been thinking about more lately is, well, custom software is starting to make more sense again. And it's not made, it hasn't made, the business case hasn't supported custom software as much in the average company any longer. And my CTO buddies are making some incredible things and doing so quicker with Gen AI, but I also have CEO buddies who don't have technology backgrounds who are creating tens of thousands of lines of code, AI slop. The apps work, but they're not sustainable. What I think is really likely right now is we're going to have an engineering boom at some point in the future because we already know how to solve these architecture problems, how to scale these products. But when we're putting these AI slop apps into production and our companies start to rely on them, who's going to fix it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mentioned about a year from now that's going to happen. But we're also in another interesting. So it's fun watching cycles happen, right? Well, whether it's on the world stage or just in something as small as technology. We're in an unbundling cycle, but we were in a bundling cycle there for a while where everyone's like, oh, I'll just buy Microsoft and everything's Microsoft and I don't need best of breed. And now everyone's like, I'm going to get custom fit and I'm going to unbundle and my CRM is going to be my thing. And then what people are going to find is you just hired 6 people, which cost you, we'll call them 200K a year employees to manage this thing. It's 1.4 million. And you're paying Salesforce 800K before. Was that really that bad? I mean, you didn't want to. But then you realize that you have to manage the infrastructure and you have to manage the feature set and you have to manage, and it's never good enough. And before you had 2 IT people in Salesforce, and now you have highly skilled people. And by the way, is that really what you want to be focused on? Your own CRM? Is that really the best usage of your time? And so in that, I think what will happen inevitably is people will find out that this was not a good usage of their time, that of course you could generate code. You could also been generating value. And in that, Salesforce generated value by building Salesforce. Is that where you're going to generate value, or should you generate value putting the time into your product, putting your time into your marketing and your sales and driving the revenue number and driving all that with all these advancements? And that's where I think the real answer will come to, but people won't come to that because it's just such a novel thing to be able to, and everyone's sick of it. Everyone's sick of the rent seeking that comes from some of these companies. I can talk about this for hours. ServiceNow, a couple of years ago, were like, hey, everybody, no discounts. And 98% of the companies of Fortune 500 use ServiceNow. So what were they going to do? Drop them? You're not going to spend $20 million for Accenture to go re-implement another system for you. So the end result was they could rent seek. And I think this is just a response to that rent seeking and the fact that it's novel and seems cool.
Yeah, companies that don't focus on value creation for all stakeholders. I mean, a company that does that if I'm a customer and I'm treated like that, I'm going to replace them as soon as I can, right? We forget that we're in the value creation business, not the value extraction business.
Yep. And there's few companies that have managed to act like that. We all know who they are. And the minute people can drop them, they do. And when you just look at their stock over time. That's all you have to do, and you'll realize who's in the value extraction business and who's actually creating value.
Well, thanks for being here, Andrew. I've really enjoyed our conversation today. Do you have any closing thoughts, books, things for the audience?
Yeah, I would say we're a tech audience here. My closing thought would always be understand human behavior. And so read the classics, right? Go and read East of Eden, which is my favorite. Go read some of the books, but also the business books, and really start to understand the cycles that exist. And then to our points earlier, I think you can start to predict where things are going to go and stay on top of it versus doing just-in-time learning and having to try to play from behind. I think that's what's helped me just not lose my mind trying to run a business and keep up with all the AI stuff that's happening like every day. That would be my parting advice.
Well, thanks again, Andrew. Best of luck to you and Bloomfilter. And thank you, everyone, for listening to Project Gamma, presented by GammaForce.io. If you've enjoyed this podcast, check us out on your favorite podcast platform to catch future episodes.